Hello, this topic is dedicated to negative emotions, their role in the human psyche, and their significance for self-development, of course, both positive and negative. We will discuss these emotions in detail and how they affect us in various aspects of life and contribute to our growth in both personal and professional spheres. Gurdjieff, and not just Gurdjieff, if you take any other self-development systems, such as, for example, they all say the same thing in unison. Negative emotions consume a person, ruin them, drain their energy, and render them incapable of any personal growth, progress, or development in any aspect of their life. This is a very important and extremely crucial practical topic for all of us. Anyone who is able to successfully navigate and work through their negative emotions, such as anger, sadness, or frustration, will be able to progress and move on to the next stage of their personal development or emotional growth journey. But it's not that straightforward. Let's figure it out. So, in essence, we have the core of our information, the informational core, which is who we are, which is what we call I am. In Christianity, this is called the soul, which is an essential part of human existence. The essence, which can be thought of as a fundamental core, is something that migrates or transfers from one body to another, moving from one form of existence to another, continuously and perpetually, but in every existence, whether it be human, animal, or otherwise. The essence, which is the core nature or spirit, acquires a certain shell through the body. This shell is informational, a complex layer of data and signals for interacting with the environment surrounding that body, including various external factors and influences. This informational formation is called personality in our terms. If it is essence, it is our personality, simply personality, a way of interacting with the surrounding world that allows for effectively and efficiently, of course, through the body. Any informational formation must have some material basis. But let's be clear, information is also matter, but it is extremely fine matter, and it cannot directly manifest in a coarser form, in the coarse matter that constitutes the surrounding world. In fact, a mediator is needed. And indeed, our personality is that mediator. In this mediator, naturally, there are indeed many programs that are absolutely not necessary for existence and survival. What kind of program? Of course, such simple programs like drinking, eating, moving, doing everything necessary for the body, for its existence, and for the essence manifested through this body, such as the protection of this organism, that is, the act of mobilizing when extremely critical circumstances arise, unusual circumstances that mobilize the organism, throwing all its forces into its defense in order to protect itself. In animals, it is usually either aggression or fear, which releases hormones into the blood necessary for increasing the body's power, protection, or flight. These hormones, such as adrenaline and cortisol, play a crucial role in the fight or flight response, which is essential for survival, enabling the animal to confront threats with increased strength or to flee from danger swiftly. A human is also an animal in a certain sense, in various ways, with the same biochemical mechanisms and functions, the same defense or attack reactions or responses, and the corresponding emotions. Emotions are, in essence, energies, a release of certain energies of a specific nature, and in fact, of a specific nature. To understand emotions, let's turn to certain social structures. It will be clearer what social structures are. In our society, various energies are managed by financial organizations and institutions and banks. Banks send out various energies, such as money, and different types of various structures, and they receive corresponding forms of feedback on whether the energy was effective or ineffective. Emotions in us are also energies sent from the corresponding emotional centers. They send out energy and receive a response to the energy sent. She was effective in some respects, and yet she was still ineffective. Negative emotions such as anger and frustration played a role in the mobilization of resources in the human body in response to some external or internal stimuli. An internal stimulus could be an illness. Internal, external, in various forms, some external aggression, an external situation where it was necessary to defend oneself, to act effectively, and situations. These programs are a normal thing for the personality, such as, and protector programs, everything is perfectly fine, everything is in its place. Indeed, they burned as much energy as was necessary in that particular specific circumstance. But as a person grew, developed, and entered the social environment, new relationships emerged between them and the social environment as they matured and gained more experiences in various aspects of life and formed connections with different people and groups. A certain new social shell, which Gurdjieff called the social personality, and I will now explain why, is referred to as the false personality. In other words, this is indeed a secondary formation, a secondary personality, which already had its own distinct characteristics, its own coloring, and its own social significance. In this context, the emotions and character traits we observe have already undergone some degree of expansion. These traits are not directly linked to immediate dangers, but are instead associated with perceived threats or potential dangers. These potential threats are what we commonly refer to as fears. By understanding this distinction, we can better comprehend how these emotions and traits develop and manifest in various situations, allowing us to address them more effectively. Fear is a reaction to a perceived danger, a preparation for it. The danger may not arise, but the preparation for it is already in progress, potentially underway in some cases. And of course, a person has a function, such as the ability to imagine and create mental images, which means they can model and predict possible future situations and scenarios. This type of modeling, if it loses control over its internal parameters and processes, starts to operate independently, which can lead to unpredictable and unintended results. In other words, imagination becomes its own powerful and highly influential force, which generates some kind of vivid, detailed, and intricate vision of the future. And this elaborate vision of the future triggers corresponding defensive reactions and negative emotions, such as fear, anxiety, and stress. And the more uncontrolled imagination we have in our minds, the more corresponding reactions and thoughts we experience and emotions. And these reactions, compared to banks, are indeed also like a release of money, a release of energy. About what? About some assumption of danger, about something unreal and imaginary. Suppose somewhere, somehow, information spreads rapidly and widely that a dangerous and deadly disease has emerged, which one can catch and die from. This disease is highly contagious and has no known cure. Some imagination arises based on previous experiences, past illnesses, when things were bad, when they were very bad, and when it was difficult. And the memory of this indeed generates an assumption, truly unfolding a picture that it will be, in fact, terribly difficult, especially when this imagination in particular relates to the imagination of other people, and especially to the imagination of other individuals. And it begins to gradually intensify and multiply more and more uncontrollably, increasingly. There arises some overestimation of danger in the perception of it, an excessive and a corresponding emotional reaction to it. And accordingly, due to such uncontrolled imagination, more and more negative emotions are increasingly and progressively formed, mobilizing the organism to overcome a potentially and possibly terrifying threat. A considerable amount of energy that is produced by the human body is directed towards this particular area, ensuring its proper and efficient functioning. That is, not to a real danger, but to an imaginary danger, in fact, actually. And this is, in fact, recorded as a necessary expenditure of energy for the protection of the body. Indeed, in order to safeguard the body. It is important to note that an individual can possess an unlimited and boundless number of vivid imaginations and irrational fears, which can vary greatly in intensity and nature. The trouble is that a person does not often monitor such phenomena, unfortunately within themselves in their daily lives, or even at all. Let me just digress a little here. These negative emotions can have a dual nature. On one hand, actively overcoming something, such as a challenge or obstacle, that is, it could be anger, it could be hatred, for example, something that forces active action, in other words, something that requires effort and determination, and conversely, the complete suppression of any resistance in any form or manner whatsoever. Anyway, everything will be decided for me, everything will be done, fate will still cover me, it will still happen, and therefore I need to relax and let go, and do nothing more because nothing can be done. Depression. People start to sob, to cry. In general, it tends to fall into a prolonged state of endless panic and continuous unrelenting self-pity, where the feelings of despair and hopelessness seem to have no end in sight. They imagine that everything is lost, that it is impossible to resist anything. And this negative emotion, as an active negative emotion, indeed also requires strength, actually requires energy from the body, in fact. But how I am indeed suffering too. I am truly also in need of energy to maintain my enduring great pain. Everything a person does requires energy in various forms and effort to accomplish tasks. Even if you definitely want to, it also requires a certain amount of energy. Because in sleep, we not only see dream images, but also the restoration of organs in the body and the replenishment of energy occur. And this also requires a certain amount of energy. Of course, on a much smaller scale, but as you can clearly see in comparison, energy. Gurdjieff said that these negative emotions, built on imagination, are indeed truly genuine and real. No joke, parasites of consciousness. This is what in essence burns the energy of our consciousness, and ultimately, due to this situation, we find ourselves feeling extremely tired and completely unable to accomplish any tasks or activities. It's as if we're doing some frantic work, but we're not doing anything at all. It's fundamentally a process of self-consumption happening inside, where various components are being gradually utilized and depleted. In other words, a person is simultaneously pressing both the gas pedal and the brake pedal if we were to compare it to a car. The engine is definitely humming, the fuel is being consumed, but the car isn't moving anywhere. This situation, undoubtedly a silly, foolish situation, truly constantly exists in people, but people generally copy other people, usually consider it normal and live in it. And in reality, the body wears out. In fact, the main parts of the body, the emotional center and the related organs also wear out. The heart and vessels, blood vessels, where blood circulates, where irreversible processes of destruction of these vessels occur. People of this kind who have a lot of imagination and many negative emotions most often experience phenomena such as cardiovascular diseases, heart attacks, and strokes. And there is nothing surprising about this. Look at a car, an ordinary car, driven by an unskilled driver. All the mechanisms wear out there as well. Our mechanisms wear out over time in the same way, just like any other machinery. But the trouble, Gurdjieff emphasized once again, the trouble is that we do not see ourselves. We don't have a mirror, an objective mirror, where we can actually observe ourselves, where we can really see what is happening to us. And here it is also important to mention that the presence of such imaginations and negative emotions, strangely enough, is related not only to the personality as a defense mechanism, but also to the essence. Essence, as an informational formation carrying memories from some past existences, can indeed carry negative loads, and also, that is, it is especially characteristic when this person was killed at the moment of death. They grasp all this fear, all this loss of existence, and carry it here. And it, like very important and crucial information, is essentially recorded in the essence. And from the essence, during the process of the construction of the personality, it is projected into the personality, in essence. And in the personality of a person who was once stabbed with a knife, they have a fear of sharp objects. The child starts screaming at the sight of a knife, a sharp object that he has never used or held in his hands. Both mom and dad are really surprised, wondering why our Mitya reacts this way to spicy foods. And Mitya indeed experiences that very fear at the sight of a sharp object, which once truly proved fatal for him. And this fear can in fact similarly be transferred to the social personality and to the false personality in many cases. Negative emotions like anger, sadness, and frustration can be severe and significantly impact mental well-being. It is important to address these feelings. This must be taken into account when working with negative emotions, because we have some negative emotions associated with elementary uncontrolled imagination, and some negative emotions coming from the depths of our consciousness. We need to work with both types through awareness, re-evaluation, and exclusion from our psyche by means of re-evaluation. That is, when we simply just start to rationally track and see. For example, I have a lot of unnecessary fussiness. I keep thinking that I'll be late for work, I'll miss the transport, I'll be late for something. And I always leave early, and then I end up standing at bus stops somewhere. Basically, I waste time. But why? Because of the fussiness, which when? It started in childhood when my mom and dad would say, "You won't make it, you won't make it, come on, come on, come on, hurry, hurry, hurry." And indeed, there was a time when I didn't make it, so this fear got fixed in my mind. Imagination added the thought that I would be punished if I didn't keep up, and it became part of my social personality. Now I'm afraid that I will always be late, and I need to go faster, faster, faster. So I say, what's the matter? From my own experience, I know that it takes 10 minutes to get out and reach the bus stop. The bus usually arrives with an interval of 1-2 minutes. It takes 15 minutes to get to work. Well, let's say the bus is delayed. We'll add 3 minutes, so that's 18 minutes. 10 plus 18 minutes. And work is just 2 minutes away from there. So it turns out to be just half an hour in total. I don't really need to leave for work an hour early. I need to leave half an hour early. Let's say consider some unexpected events, like for example the elevator being crowded and I'll have to wait for it. Let's take 5 minutes, no more. 35 minutes, okay, that should be enough. And you must leave in 35 minutes. That's it, no more fears of being late. And here, as this experience is indeed realized, and confidence truly and most certainly appears that yes, everything is certainly as it should be, this fear of being late will undoubtedly and assuredly begin to dissipate, like an unfulfilled expectation. Of course, this may manifest elsewhere, but here we already have experience overcoming such foolishness within us. In the same rational way, we can identify our other fears and imaginations. But this is a difficult process because we do not see ourselves. You need to have a group, you need to have people around who are also tracking themselves, their expressions and fears, and tracking us. And they say, listen, what is happening with you? Let's pay attention to this. And in this case, the person starts to really look and ask, what's actually happening? And why these negative emotions? Many people have a fear of being bitten by a spider, which is a common phobia. This fear can be triggered by seeing a spider or even thinking about one, and they are afraid of all spiders. Although, as it turned out, among spiders, people, and not in the temperate zone, but somewhere there, in the tropics, well, maybe a little in the subtropics, there are two poisonous spiders, tarantulas and solifugae. You won't find other poisonous spiders like caracuts there. They are definitely somewhere in the deserts, where we can't seem to venture. But seeing any little spiders, which are only capable of catching small flies, we are horrified. This is a very typical and incredibly amusing domestic fear, a commonplace, entertaining fear. But notice, everyone who hears me now can honestly and truly say to themselves, I really am very afraid of spiders. And genuinely. This is an example of a silly childhood fear that many of us had when we were young. There is, especially in the city, a fear of getting infected. It must be said that the fear of infection has both an objective and a subjective nature. Indeed, objective? Well, yes. Some sick people walk around and they emit all kinds of microbes that, in general, are capable of entering our bodies and causing illness. At the same time, it does not take into account that, in fact, our body has developed very powerful and extremely efficient means and mechanisms of counteraction against various threats and challenges over time. Our immune system possesses the remarkable ability to effectively neutralize and combat any pathogenic microbes that pose a threat to our health and well-being. We don't take this into account. But by the way, an interesting message. Studies have shown that a person who is engulfed in fears, who is all fear, has reduced resistance, their immune system is suppressed, and they get infected more easily than someone who has inner strength, who is confident in themselves, who of course follows hygiene rules, washes their hands, does everything as required, but is strong. He has a lot of energy in the emotional center, and the emotional center sends corresponding impulses to the emotional part of the instinctive center, which manages the immune system. The immune system actively responds and resists, tracking all moments of damage and neutralizing them. That is, you see, the fear of getting infected automatically suppresses the immune system, strangely enough. But these are just such fears. But we have many other fears that have no basis at all, except for imagination. And in reality, these fears are completely unfounded and based solely on our imagination. Childhood fears can be overwhelming and paralyzing. Our good friend, who is very reliable, reports that once, upon entering the dense and dark forest, he found himself feeling extremely scared and anxious. He is shaking, trembling, unable to venture deeper into the forest. A comrade says, "What's wrong with you?" But I am a person working on myself. I stopped and started thinking about what was wrong with me. Why do I have such turmoil inside? He delved deeper. What memories are associated with this? And suddenly something dawned on him. He came home, turned on the computer, and played a children's cartoon. Whom did he suspect of these fears? And unpacking this cartoon, seeing it, he indeed remembered his 3 years of life. Perhaps, when he was 3 years old, he watched this cartoon and reacted to it with all the intensity of a child. He was terribly frightened. There was a terrifying forest and terrifying creatures. And this 40-year-old man who was standing nearby suddenly and unexpectedly burst out laughing. I realized that I was reacting with emotions that I had been carrying for years, emotions that were developed in childhood, and I felt a sense of relief. And finally, he says, leading to an interesting and ultimately unexpected consequence. And suddenly this person found strength. He was a creative individual. It is very important in the emotional center to have the strength for creativity. New projects, new thoughts, and new ideas, and new concepts, and new initiatives have emerged. He started working on those projects that he was afraid to touch, lacked the strength for. Something was holding him back. I can't understand what. That is indeed, here is actually another aspect of negative emotions, slightly. They exhaust and deplete the emotional center, leaving it insufficient even for normal creativity, vitality, and overall well-being. He is simply able to exist in this world, but not to create at all, thus lacking any impact on new ideas, art, or innovations. Not to mention that some energy is indeed required for higher levels of consciousness, for what we call meditations, when through our conscious effort we induce the state of opening higher centers, such as the third eye. What discoveries of higher centers can a person who is completely crushed by negative emotions make? None. Therefore, the first and main task of a person is to monitor and overcome negative imagination and the corresponding negative emotions. This collaborative effort is group work, while this task represents individual effort. In our work, in our research, we use a method to access the lower levels of consciousness and the non-verbal levels of consciousness. If we were to, and we often use the Enneagram for such analysis, look at the Enneagram, it would be a transition to that level of consciousness where non-verbal thinking, where thinking is of an imaginative nature, there are no words, but it is very understandable to the lower levels of the personality's consciousness. And the personality can indeed very well manage that very ancient recollection through the personality effectively. By indeed reaching the level of personality, one can truly discover those significant influences that come from afar, from the essence. Not to mention, of course, those layers of impressions that certainly come from childhood and beyond. Childhood unpacks quite well, but essential impressions are indeed somewhat more complex and intricate. And to penetrate there, one indeed needs good concentration and truly deep immersion into that level of consciousness, which we call personality. There, a transition to the essential level of consciousness is already taking place, where the essence suddenly shows images that are not characteristic of the personality, experiences that the personality did not have. For example, the experience of a war in which this person has never actually been, but where there were horrific scenes that deeply traumatized and were remembered by this person, or corresponding fears that stemmed from there. Thanks to this, a person becomes aware of what is called karma as cause and effect relationships, and begins to reevaluate them, become aware of them, and reduce their significance. This assessment becomes insignificant for a person in this life, in any significant way or impact. From a specific and memorable experience, one of our comrades tells a story saying, "I suddenly saw myself standing right in the middle of such a vast and ancient stone courtyard, surrounded by tall weathered walls and intricate carvings. It was like ancient Moscow, in a way that was reminiscent of old Moscow. And I was overwhelmed by an absolutely terrible feeling of guilt and remorse for the death of my dear relative, who was a sailor and tragically died somewhere. This unbearable heaviness was on me. I could feel it weighing on myself. It's a feeling of guilt, of being really down. I truly felt cold and uncomfortable. And then I realized I was somehow fighting with something. Why do I still feel this strange heaviness and this guilt and confusion? I am already in another place, in another body, right now, at this moment. Why do I have to go through all this again in the emotional center? It's really stupid. This assessment of stupid immediately and completely relieved the tension in the emotional and psychological center, this load, this program, and the person felt different upon coming out of that meditative state. This is an experience of analyzing essential experiences, negative essential experiences. How would you say, in other words, cleansing karma and achieving a state of liberation? But we say this: past negative experiences also burden our psyche, but we are completely unaware of them. What is the reality? Our methods involve a rational and thorough investigation of one's negative emotions, workloads, and a non-verbal exploration by deeply immersing into what Pavlov would carefully call the first signaling system. Although, as we already know from numerous studies, humans indeed have many such signaling systems. The other thing is that he is not very aware of them and does not know how to deal with them. Nevertheless, they exist, and there are methods that allow us to delve into these states, find everything there that hinders our normal existence. That is, those negative emotions and burdens that come from these deep layers, reevaluate and reinterpret them, and free ourselves from them. And thus, with each liberation, a person gradually becomes more and more powerful emotionally. And indeed, emotional power is essentially the power of all other centers. Our energy bank, emotional center, supplies energy to other emotional parts of the centers. This is indeed truly like the instinctive sexual motor intellectual center and the intellectual part of the emotional center. He begins to experience the opening of higher centers, which usually manifests as a kind of intuition, often referred to as an insight or illumination. So these insights are becoming increasingly more and more frequent. A person's intuition begins to unfold, not as sudden insights, but as a constant sense of something higher, more subtle, and something that brings meaning to life and joy to life. This is what all the hard and dedicated work and effort that we have invested is for. The initial stage of the process involves tracking and effectively managing and neutralizing negative emotions.